Well, there's some things I can't live without, and air conditioning is one of them, and our Impala's just not cutting it. You know, it's blowing cold sometimes, and then sometimes it's not blowing at all. Most of the time, just ambient temperature. So today on Tech Garage, an AC diagnostics and repair is in order. Welcome to Tech Garage, presented by RockAuto.com. We got our 07 Malibu in the shop, and if you watched a prior episode, we put an ABS unit on it. Brian, I have to tell you, it's stopping on a dime, man. It stops great, not a problem. Driving it around, though, air condition problems. Blowing AC, not blowing AC, not really hot, but it's not doing what it should be doing. I know the key to diagnosing are gauges.
And that's absolutely no fun. Yeah, today's AC systems require tremendous balance, the right pressure, the right balance, all that stuff. But like any project we do here in the Tech Garage, we're going to start this one with a proper diagnostic process, and that really begins with the right set of tools like gauges that everybody should have to help us tell the story.
Absolutely. We just hooked it up to the low side and the high side, and this tells everything we need to know. And on this one here, you can see the low side. Now the low side, it's a little bit high. It's up about 50. We'll look at some good gauge readings in a minute, but that's high. And my high side, it's about normal. It's 150. So that tells me a couple of things. Number one, that tells me the compressor's working because it almost looks like a bad compressor reading, but I'll show you that in a minute. But it's actually putting some pressure in the system, so that's all right. But the deal is the low side is actually not really pulling a vacuum. That makes me suspect a TXV. But I know what, I got that freeze spray you got there.
Yeah.
If you take that freeze spray and you freeze the top of that TXV, we should see that low side drop.
And this is liquid nitrogen, really, really cold stuff.
Yeah,
all right, here we go.
All right. Great. That's wonderful. Look at what's happening. Absolutely nothing. So what's the deal is that should drop just a little bit because you froze the top of that TXV. When you do that, bam, it should go closed. If it's going closed, that compressor should pull that into a vacuum. So I'm suspecting a bad TXV valve.
Yeah, that's the one place in the system that there could be some kind of restriction, some kind of a bottleneck. And interestingly, John didn't complain of a belt squeal or any sound, strange sounds from the compressor when he turned it on to max AC. So even though the gauge systems could be a compressor, doesn't really look like it at this point, but we need to go ahead and prove that.
Yeah, you know what? Gauge readings are key. I have a couple of gauge readings right up here on the screen, Brian.
Perfect.
And this is going to help anybody out because it doesn't help looking at the gauges unless you know what you're looking at. So right here, we actually have the average readings here. What should it be? And, you know, the systems today with the refrigerant in there should be around 30 on the low side, up to about, 175, 225 on the high side. The compressor's pushing, it's pulling it into a vacuum. Everything's good there. Now, ambient without it running should be about ambient temperature, whatever the temperature is. And that's also going to affect gauge readings. If it's cold outside, they may be a little lower. If it's hot outside, a little bit higher. Now this one, Brian, this one system's low on charge. It's pretty obvious.
Low and low. That one's pretty obvious, right? The system can't push, compressor can't push, and it can't pull to create that balance that we talked about. So low and low is pretty clear what it is.
Exactly what's going on the low side. Now, condenser, airflow, or overcharge. Too much refrigerant in the system. It starts to get hot in the front up here. Once it gets hot, look at, they're both going to climb up a little bit. So what's happening? The low side's high side's high. Usually a restriction of airflow in the condenser. And last but not least, almost similar to ours, Brian, is that weak compressor, man. We're talking about the low side up to 40 or 50, that's where I was, even a little bit higher. Ours was a little bit more than that. But the weak compressor can't push, so it's below 150. Ours was up there pretty good. It was pushing.
Yeah.
And with that spray, I'll tell you what, we got a TXV problem, thermostatic expansion valve.
Yeah, that certainly puts us in the right direction of pursuit of the problem. So I think what I'll do, I'll go ahead and recover the refrigerant out of this system using the Arctic Pro. If you don't have the tool to do it yourself, take it and get it done so you're doing everything by the book. That process is pretty easy. I'll get that going.
And you know what? I can simulate this problem. I got the coolest demo in the world. I got an AC system set up where you can see everything along with the H-block. We can freeze it and see what the gauge is supposed to do, so we'll know exactly what's going on with our Impala. You get started, I'll get it set up.
Awesome. So with the Arctic Pro, we're coming back into the low pressure side of the system here. Same thing, get a good fit and connection, tighten that valve back down. Now the Arctic Pro does all the hard work for us here. So we got a good fit, everything's secure. We come over and we just follow the menu prompts. In this case, it's called recycle. We're actually recovering from the system. So would you like to check the oil or just level continue? Yes, connect valves and hoses, we've done that. Now it's clearing the system out, clearing any contamination out of there that may be in the way so they can get a proper recovery. We'll follow the prompts through this system, get everything out, be ready for full-blown service. The TXV expansion valve back here on the firewall is really an H-block 10mm bolt. I'm going to get that out once we're recovered, and we'll be ready for the repair. So stay with us on Tech Garage, brought to you by rockauto.com.
Tech Garage, presented by rockauto.com, is being brought to you by Borla, the world's most winning exhaust. Evapo-Rust, super safe rust remover. And by rockauto.com, all the parts your car will ever need.
Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by rockauto.com. Well, how about a fully functional, operational, and the gauges work AC system right here so you can see everything in wide open. Now, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have to go through the AC cycle. It's always the basics, but it gives you a better understanding when you were diagnosing, and Bryan and I looked at those gauge readings. This will help out. It all starts right here at the compressor. Now, the compressor is going to put out a high pressure gas, and this is the hottest part of the system. So if I was feeling this, it would feel really, really warm. And what's going to go on is it's going to send that over to what's called a condenser. That's located in the front of the car. Now, in the condenser, it changes states. The refrigerant changes from a high pressure gas to a high pressure liquid. Then what it's going to do, it's either going to send it through, a little bit later we'll look at an orifice tube, which would be an accumulator, but this one's a receiver dryer because it's before the thermostatic expansion valve. So it goes through the receiver dryer, and then it comes over to this H block, which has a thermostatic expansion valve built into it. But what does that do? It changes the pressures. So now we're going from a high pressure to a low pressure. And really cool, you can have an orifice tube as well. You may have an orifice tube system. This orifice tube will do the same thing. The difference is the thermostatic expansion valve regulates, and I'll show you, it's really precise. After that, we're going to take the refrigerant, we're going to take it as a low pressure, which is very, very cold, and we're going to take it as a liquid and bring it into the evaporator. The evaporator is located inside the car. Now that evaporator is going to blow that hot air from inside the car across it. It's going to boil off. So what's going to happen? It's going to turn into a gas. So it goes from a low pressure liquid to a low pressure gas and then returns back to the compressor. Now the component we're dealing with over on an Impala, that's this H block or thermostatic expansion valve. And I have one cut away for you right here so you can actually see it. What happens, and on the top here you have a sensing ball. The sensing ball actually lets this thing open and close. So for example, if it's really cold in there and the evaporator's starting to get cold, this is supposed to close and stop the refrigerant flow, and then it's going to heat up a little bit. Now if it's hot in there, the sensing ball will allow this to open up. It'll let the refrigerant flow through there and it'll get the car cooler. Now what we did, we actually sprayed it with this spray right here, and that's what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to spray this, and what you want to do is you really want to watch closely with these gauges. Now these gauges are critical. You can see on the gauges right now, this is perfect. My low side sitting there about 30, 32, my high side sitting there about 100. That's perfect, okay? It's a little cool in here, so that's good reading. Now when I spray it, watch that low side should drop a hair. Why? Because the thermostatic expansion valve closes. When it closes, watch the flow will also stop. This is really cool. Where are you going to see glass tubes on an AC system except for at Tech Garage? I spray it, refrigerant flows, gauge moves, it's working. We sprayed our Impala, nothing. Check this out. There goes the gauge dropping, and voila. Refrigerant flow stops. Exactly what we want to see in a proper operating system. What happened? Thermostatic expansion valve slam closed. It's going to warm up in a second here. Everything's going to go back to working normally. Meanwhile, the temperature's regulated inside the car. Perfectly operating system. The Impala, on the other hand, sprayed it, no change. Bryan hit this diagnosis right on the head. It's a thermostatic expansion valve. Let's check in with him and see how he's coming along with it.
Well, we are in great shape over here, John. We've got the old thermostatic expansion valve H block all removed. Here's the temperature sensor. Remember this from John's demo? You can see how it fits, how it works on this thing. To the naked eye, nothing really looks wrong with it. But that's why the proper diagnostic process is really important, so we know we're replacing exactly what needs replaced. Now here's the new one from Rock Auto. You can see it looks exactly the same size ports, same temperature sensor, and they even give us a new stud here so we can get a really good tight fit with those refrigerant lines. So before I get this installed, we got to get the O-rings reseated. Now down here on the firewall, on the lines, I've got the first 2 O-rings in line. Those are the new ones that came with the kit. Make sure you got plenty of PAG oil for lubricant to get around them and get them seated down where they want to be. Now on the refrigerant lines themselves, you've got to remove the old O-rings. Let's do the large one first. Comes right off. Again, in the kit from Rock Auto, there's a new one. You can see there's green PAG oil everywhere here, so I've got plenty of lubrication to get these on. If it was dry, you'd want to add some PAG oil to make sure you get a good fit without damaging that O-ring at all. Let's go ahead and do the small one. Same thing. Here's the new one. Goes on. Got lots of oil and lubrication there to get a good seat down on there. Now, I've got 2 anchor bolts, just like the old one, to go back in and get it reinstalled. We'll come down here, take your time and work it in. You'll feel it seat down on those O-rings. It can only go one way. Right there, you can feel it seat very clear. I'm going to go ahead and get one of the studs in, and we'll go ahead and torque that down to spec. Torque specs are everything here. We're going to get the studs right, get the refrigerant lines back on, get everything buttoned up to proper torque, and then the final step. We've got to vacuum the system of any moisture. Okay, so we're down here in Florida. That's about a 45-minute job. If you're in some other state, it might be closer to 30 minutes. Our Arctic Pro is going to do that for us back to the low side port. But you could do that vacuuming with a vacuum pump. You could draw that out. Again, 30 to 45 minutes, check the spec and see what it wants to be. We'll get that done. We'll top it off with refrigerant, and John will have nothing to complain about anymore. So, tell you what, stay with us on Tech Garage, brought to you by rockauto.com. Project M&M is going to be exciting today. We're going to keep cool.
Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by rockauto.com. Well, Project M&M, the Mercury Makeover, is back in for more maintenance items, and so is Tom. Tom, you're with us. Tom, we're one step closer for cruising this baby around. We're going to go look for some Thai food. I know you like Thai food, and you're even going to drive. What are we going to tackle this time?
Replace the coolant, replace the hoses, get the coolant system up to date.
And that's a good idea. I mean, we got coolant left, we got transmission and differential we'll do a little later. We're going to touch every fluid on this car. Why do we want to replace the coolant?
Well, it's been 10 years and we're replacing the hoses, so I'd hate to take out old coolant, try to filter out the crud and put it back in. That just doesn't make sense. So replace the coolant and the hoses at the same time.
And that's just common sense. If this isn't proof enough, well, you look right here. I actually dipped this. We actually opened the petcock and drained some of the coolant out. I have some right here. And if you look at it on the bottle, I mean, we're down here to almost no protection whatsoever. I mean, we're down to 225 degrees. I mean, nothing. I mean, this thing's going to boil over. Our pH is about middle of the road. It's time to flush it regardless. So that's one thing we can do. Now, you can also pressure test the system. This is important. If you think you have a leak or your coolant's going down, it's pretty simple. You just take the cap off, get you a pressure tester like this here. We did ours a little earlier, a little adapter to screw on there. Then I take the pressure tester, I put it on there, I pump it up, and I actually watch the pressure. If the pressure starts to drop or starts to drop down on the gauge here, what's telling us is we got a leak. We can have an external leak or an internal leak. I mean, no matter what, we're going to go ahead and service this one. So where are you going to start with, Tom?
Well, let's start at the top. We got the thermostat housing, the thermostat, and the upper radiator hose. Easy to see. Let's start here.
Okay, great. So you're going to go ahead and get the clamps. I'll start removing the thermostat housing. Bolts on top of here. Now these things, you know, you have years and years of use and abuse on there, and they could be cooked on there. Sometimes you need to take a pick and go around there and get them off, and you get that off. I'll go ahead and wiggle this hose off right here on the upper one before I move it. There it goes. All right, I'll give you a hand with that. Pull these bolts out. There you go. Thermostat's located right inside of the housing right here. You'll see it in a second as soon as I get this pulled off. Good idea to replace it too, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting the engine up to the proper speed is extra important these days with the newer cars. You're thinking about the temperature of the transmission as well as the engine, and it's got to be at the right point.
Yeah, thermostat, that's an important piece of the puzzle. I mean, anytime you overheat a car, always replace the thermostat. I mean, if it fails, you got catastrophic damage. Now you just picked out the O-ring. Now we got a new thermostat and we ordered an O-ring as well. That's pretty cool. So once you do that, you grab them pliers there, see, or they're loose. Yeah, once you get that O-ring out of there, you're in good shape. There's the old one. Just match it up to the new one.
Yeah,
make sure our surface is clean. Yeah, everything looks pretty good. It's nice because we have an O-ring. We don't have a gasket, so we can just put the new O-ring right in there.
Yeah, Ford did this right. This is nice.
Yeah, it's real nice. Then we'll go ahead and put the thermostat housing back on. Take notice that there's two different size bolts, or excuse me, they're same bolts, but they're long bolts. They don't go into a coolant jacket, so I don't need any RTV or anything on them. We'll just put it back on there. I'll go ahead and get that started while you get the clamps going. Now, one other thing too that I want to mention is right here. I pressure test the system, the cap. Now, the cap is another integral part of the system because the cap allows it to build pressure. And when we build pressure, it actually starts to raise up the boiling point, and that's huge. So what I'm going to do is we ordered from rockauto.com, same thing. We got a cap as well. So we're just going to go ahead and put the cap on there. And when we put the cap on there, we know we're going to be sealed, good to go. New cap fits right. We'll fill it up with coolant. We'll bleed the system, and we'll be good to go. Tom, we'll get that put on there in a second. Why don't you just let it sit there. Talk about this hose for a minute because this is actually crazy.
Yeah, you see that a lot these days. The super complex radiator hoses, you'll even see the radiator cap on a fitting in the middle of the hose. Yeah. And this is something you want to get the original equipment style system. You don't want to use something like this, a universal one size fits all.
No, not on this
fittings,
one.
You'll create a plumbing nightmare. So.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't notice too is really inside the hose. Take a look in there, Tom. What do you think of that mess? I mean,
yeah, that's where a lot of the damage happens these days, is inside the hose where you can't see. It used to be, oh, I can look and see bulges and stuff on the outside. It'll be in the hose, so you just got to replace it as part of routine maintenance versus something you'll see on the outside.
Yeah, you wouldn't even know that as well. Now let's go ahead, get that buttoned up. Talk a little bit about that thermostat, because I know we're going to head over to the table and look at some of these housings.
This is a pretty nice thermostat housing. It's metal. Maybe you could break off one of these ears, or you could have some corrosion. But a lot of new cars these days have these super complex plastic housings with multiple fittings, and those warp and crack and leak. And so we sell a lot of replacements. And I have a tip on when you install a replacement, how to get it to last longer.
Well, let's get this buttoned up, and we'll head over to the computer and check it out.
Sounds good.
Now, I mentioned earlier, anytime you overheat a car, replace the thermostat. Problem is, some of these coolant housings, man, these things are apparatuses.
Yeah, plastic started being used on a lot of vehicles, and they may have multiple nipples and very complex. I pulled up the 2001 Ford Focus as an example. You can see just how complex these things are. Nipples and the replacement ones are often better with metal reinforcing in the fittings, so you can't over tighten them. A neat little trick that I know of is put them in boiling water before you install them. Maybe that limbers up the plastic a little bit. You're less likely to get a stress crack down the road.
Yeah, and torque specifications are key. Stick around. There's plenty more Tech Garage right after this break.
Tech Garage, presented by RockAuto.com, is being brought to you by Z-Max, the one product for your engine, transmission, and fuel system. Clamp Tight, the clamp making tool. And by RockAuto.com, all the parts your car will ever need.
Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by RockAuto.com. This week's video question everybody can use if you ever had a flat tire.
Oh no, another flat, and I don't have AAA, and I don't know how to change it. Could you guys give a lesson on how to change a tire?
Great question, Jayla. This is a universal language. Everybody's going to face this at one time or another. Believe it or not, one of the most important tools you've got in this repair is your owner's manual. You got the play-by-play, the step-by-step, where to put the jack, but it all begins with knowing exactly where your tools are and your jack is that came with the vehicle.
Yeah, and everything's located right in there. It shows it just like in the service manual. You got your jack, you got your actual crank handle, your lug nuts to actually break them loose. Man, they even give you a battery tool and a tow hook if you need it. But everything's right in there. The key is to look at this graphic. It's step by step on how to do it. Everything you need to know is right in there.
Well, Jayla, it looks like the good news is you're working there in a parking lot and you don't have 18-wheelers going by at 70 miles an hour. But if you're alongside the road, get as far off the road from moving traffic as you can. Now, the first step is before you actually jack the vehicle up, to break the lug nuts loose with this wrench that's provided, then John's going to need this to jack it up. So I like to put the wrench where I can get a good pull. This is good leverage when you pull up. If you still can't get it, you can always rotate the wrench around, use your foot, and break these loose that way. So now we've got that loose, and John will show you how to jack it up.
Great. Now what I did is in the service manual, I found the actual jacking location under here. It's the pinch weld of the frame. Put the jack under there. I screwed it up by hand till I got it to touch, and then I'm going to use the two tools. I'm just going to come in here, hook that, and use the lug wrench that Bryan just used as the turning point. So as I start twisting it, it takes a little force, but the car is going to go up, 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 till we can basically spin that wheel for free there, Bryan?
Yep.
There it goes. All right, you're there now, right?
Good deal. Yep, and of course your emergency brake is on for all this.
All right.
So if you let me the wrench back, we'll go ahead and get these lug nuts off. You spin them around, you work all these off, and then you just swap the wheel.
And make sure when you're jacking it that you're on a good surface. Now, if the jack starts squishing down in the mud or you're not level, it's going to get dangerous. So, and you only have so much throw on this jack, so it has to be on a good concrete surface. It has to be level.
There's the last lug nut. Now, most wheels and tires are pretty big these days. Don't try to pick this up. Just come off onto the ground, roll it around back. You get your spare here. You need to lift it out of the trunk, but the good news is it's much, much lighter. Roll it in. You want to line up the holes for the lug studs.
Cool.
Get it seated. Thanks, John.
Yep, give you a hand, just screw them on. Here's the point where you want to just go and snug them. You're not going to be able to tighten them up till you put them all the way on the ground, but we'll snug them up right here. We'll get them all on. Then what you're going to do after you get them on, snug them here, we'll drop it back down just to reverse the procedure. Come over here, hook up this right here, and then wind down on it, drop the car back down. Man, this is a great lesson, Bryan. You know what?
Absolutely.
Also great was that Malibu, man. Woo, it's
Yeah,
going cool.
way, way better. That was
Yep.
a fun and easy repair.
Sure enough.
Congratulations, Jayla. You just changed your first flat tire. You're going to do this safely.
Yep, I'll tell you what, it's time to go today. So check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and we'll be back here next week, right here in the confines of Tech Garage, presented by rockauto.com.
Production assistance for Tech Garage is provided by Chipola College, located in Marianna, Florida. Founded in 1947, Chipola College is a member institution of the Florida College System, with a current enrollment of over 2,000 students. Chipola was recently ranked as one of the top 3 community colleges in the United States.